Hi, everyone. Dr. Sheftall again with Truth in Science. Tonight, we're going to do an update on the vaccine issue. Only one day after I put down the first Q&A on the vaccine, because something very interesting happened today, and I thought y'all would want to hear about how I felt about it. So let's proceed. You can take a look at this later. We're just going to skip this slide, but please do remember to check me out on Patreon. Now, the question that's very important to everyone is if you've had a positive antibody or PCR test, do you have to get the vaccine? No, you should not have to do that. You should be protected better than you could be from the vaccine. There's a little bit of disagreement on this by the experts, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So this is a very important update. Just wanted to remind everyone that when you get infected with the virus, lots of studies have been performed, and you get a 100% T helper response, that's the CD4 subset, and a 70% T killer response, that's CD8. For all of these antigens, the spike, the M, which are the proteins that determine the radius of curvature or the size of the virus, the N proteins, which are the proteins which stabilize the RNA inside the virus, and the non-structural proteins also inside the capsule of the virus. You do get very good immunoglobulin response. You get 100% of the patients that get infected with SARS-2 get an IgG response, and 80% get an IgA response. So this is continued here, and this is where the controversy occurs. Dr. Fauci said on TV today in a CNN town hall that you should get it, meaning the vaccine, even if you've had the disease, because, quote, the antibody response from the vaccine is equal to or greater than that from convalescent serum. The problem is this is very misleading for a couple of major reasons. And let me just tell you the first obvious one right now. They're looking at the antibody response at the highest point because they want to show that the vaccines are working. They want to show that they make a good antibody response. But when they try to compare that to convalescent serum, convalescent means you've recovered from the disease. So they're comparing it to people who have recovered any amount of time before. And I've already explained how antibodies will drop with time because they're just protein molecules and they have a half-life like all other molecules. So that's one way that it's misleading. The other way is that he's only looking at antibodies and he's neglecting T cells again. So let me just show you graphically where I'm coming from, and I'll prove my point in just a second. I just showed you this picture right here, and it shows that the T cells respond to the S, M, N, and non-structural proteins, whereas the antibodies are only responding to the spike proteins, okay? And to think that you're going to get the same kind of protection from a syringe full of messenger RNA that does translate into a spike protein as you would from a T cell response against all of these different proteins is almost absurd to think that. Look at the viruses attacking the cell here. If you don't have if T cell mediated immunity is not part of your response, which is being neglected by Dr. Fauci's statement, you probably will not survive the infection. It's overwhelming. I'm going to show you some pictures that'll blow you away in a second. But first, let's get a little more analytical about this and show why I think Dr. Fauci is wrong. Now, when you use one of these messenger RNA viruses, it codes for a spike protein. That's all it does. It codes for a spike protein in the recipient cell, and that spike protein will be seen as an antigen by your B cell response and your T cell. But it's my contention that the T cell response is much, much more important in viruses. And let me just give you an example. Have you ever wondered why some vaccines last longer than others? For example, measles vaccines, when you take measles vaccines when you're young, they protect you for life. And I'd like to compare that to hepatitis B vaccines, which surgeons have to take. And I'd like to tell you that we have to get a booster every 10 years for the hepatitis B vaccine. So what's the difference? The difference is the hepatitis B vaccine is a subunit vaccine. It's only part of the virus that is being put inside you to mount the response. Okay, very similar to the SARS-2 vaccine in a way, because the SARS-2 vaccine is really only putting in the spike protein. But the measles vaccine is a live attenuated vaccine. In other words, it takes the measles virus and injures it in such a way that it can't make you sick, but they're putting the entire virus inside of you, okay? And that's why the response is so good, and that's why it lasts your whole life, because it's much closer to the real thing, if you will, okay? So it's incorrect for Dr. Fauci to think that the vaccine made from a spike protein will confer the same degree of protection as that afforded by the virus itself, which is what happens when you get infected. You're going to respond to the virus itself. That's going to be a much more vigorous response. It's going to last longer, and it's going to be far more broad. Like I showed you in the picture before, it's going to include responses to all these proteins, not just a spike protein. So it's just incorrect for Dr. Fauci to say that. Now, I don't completely understand why he's saying things like this, neglecting T cells, which are far more important, not considering the broadness of the response, lots of things. We'll get into that in just a second. Okay, let me just put this in perspective for you for a second before we look at these graphics here. This is a cell that has been infected by virus. Can you see the number of virus particles in the cell getting ready to be released? Look at this. It's unbelievable how many virus particles are being made inside this cell. Okay? Now remember, when a virus hijacks your replication machinery inside one of your cells, be it a lung cell, a bronchi, intestine, whatever, it makes the proteins necessary to function, okay? Like I said in the primer, in the long video that I gave everyone, it lasted 4 hours. It covered everything about the SARS-2 pandemic. In the immunology primer that I showed you, the virus comes up to the side of the cell and allows its RNA to get inside the cell. The first protein that is made is the polymerase, so it can copy itself, okay? It also has to make M proteins, N proteins to stabilize that RNA that it's making for itself, etc. Now, all of those proteins that it makes when it gets inside the host cell will get chopped up in the proteasomes and presented in the context of the class 1 or class 2 major histocompatibility complex proteins. And I won't go into the detail tonight. I think everyone has become an expert in immunology and understands that now. They certainly can go back and look at the other videos if they want to review it. But the point is, lots of different proteins are presented on the surface of the host cells to stimulate the T cell response so that the host can survive this infection. I mean, look at this. This is just an enormous command of the machinery there to be able to take it over and make that many copies of the virus. So you need some serious immune response to be able to take care of that. And the most important one in the respect of this cell that has been absolutely taken over is the T killer cell, the CD8 subset. This cell needs to be killed. And remember, when apoptosis occurs, all the viruses inside also get killed because of the nuclease activity, which I mentioned. But you need the T cells to kill this cell, okay, efficiently. So that's why they must be included. And again, here's the list of all the proteins that are needed to assemble a virus particle and that are attacked by the T cell side of the adaptive immune system, which Dr. Fauci is not including in statements like you need to take the vaccine because your antibodies are greater in number than convalescent serum shows. But again, convalescent serum could have been old. All right, let's continue on. Now, this is a little bit of a redundant slide, because it says basically the same thing that I just said. Antibodies are much less efficient at destroying host cells that have been infected. And this is actually a cell taken from the talk I gave yesterday. So you can go back and review my explanation of all this if you'd like to. But let's look at this now and see how it applies to you. Hearing all this from experts who are not being completely, I'll say it, honest with the American people about a lot of these things makes me less likely to get the vaccine. And let me explain why. The doctors, the TV doctors and the experts seem to be trying very hard to promote this vaccine. Dr. Reiner today said that 60 to 70% of the US population will need to get the vaccine so that we can achieve herd immunity. But the number's more like 10% because 50% of us are already protected, at least. And look at the graph. I just took this graph from 10 minutes ago. It is the new deaths from COVID right up to the minute. And let me get my glasses on, see if I can say something helpful from this. New York is highlighted here. The worst state is Texas. There's Pennsylvania's in there, California, et cetera, but everything's bunched in there. These are daily deaths below 100, right around below 150. Most of them are below 100 per day. And there were times when there were 2,000 deaths per day in some of these states. In New York, there were 2,300 and something some of the days. They averaged well over 1,000 per day for weeks on end. And we're seeing now that it's down to 50 for New York. So keeping this thing in perspective now, a lot of people in New York are protected from this. New York has really basically achieved herd immunity. And the reason there's a little bit of a bump here at the end on December 5th is because of seasonal variations. There's even when you have full herd immunity, some people are going to die sadly in the winter because there's going to be a seasonal bump every winter. Okay, that's the influenza is also a seasonal virus. That's why we have the flu season. The common cold is. And that's what you need to keep in perspective. I'd also like you please to remember what I said about the PCR test. They're very misleading because they're not measuring the virus. They're only measuring RNA. Yes, it's viral RNA, but it could have been in the back of the nasopharynx for months, and the patient could have recovered from the illness months ago. So when they assign a death to SARS-2 or COVID, right? Because they found RNA in the nasopharynx of someone who's admitted to the hospital, doesn't mean that they died because of SARS-2. As a matter of fact, you can't die from a virus you recovered from 3 months ago, okay? So it's very misleading. The statistics are way inflated right now. And I just want everyone to keep it in perspective. The country's coming much, much closer to herd immunity without the vaccine than anyone will admit. But if you look at graphs like this, even in the states that you think are just having a horrible time right now, and these are not corrected for population. And when you do correct these things for population, a state like California drops down very fast. So does New York, so does Florida, so does Texas. These are absolute numbers here. And they're still much, much lower than what we saw when we truly were in the stages of an epidemic. We are not in an epidemic anymore. I know they keep saying this is the worst it's been, but just look at this graph of deaths. This is not even close to how bad it's been. And again, we're in the season now, okay? This is the time of the year where it's supposed to have a bump. So just please try to keep all of this in perspective. Today, Doctors Fauci, Gupta, Wynn, and Reiner were telling everyone that they should get the vaccine even if they've recovered from the disease. That just absolutely makes no sense. Why do you think you recovered from the disease? Remember, according to the WHO, 785 million people have been exposed to this virus, okay? We've had about 1.5 million, 1.5 million deaths in the world so far, which is horrible. We've only had a handful of people that have recovered from the virus and gotten it again, okay? I'm telling you, a handful. I know of 6 or 7 that I've read about in the literature. That means there might be 20 in the world, because certainly there's some that we haven't heard about, but a very small number compared to 785 million. So once you get the immune response from being exposed, only a tiny handful of people have gotten the illness again. Okay, think about that for a second. That's about 1 in a million. I mean, I'm sorry, that's 1 in 10 million of the ones I know about. So it's extremely rare to get it again. If you multiply the number maybe that have gotten it more than once by 3, and you divide 10 million by 3, I'm sorry, 100 million. Oh gosh, can't do arithmetic anymore. Getting too old. 785 million, and only 7 that I know of have gotten the illness twice. That's 1 in 100 million. So if you say there are 3 times as many as I've heard about, that would be 1 in 30 million that are getting it more than once, which means the immune system is unbelievably effective at keeping you from getting sick again. So to think that you have to get a vaccine after you've recovered from the illness, when the chances are 1 in 30 million that you would get it more than once, it's just, to me, it's just absurd. I can't believe they're actually saying this. So again, I'm a strong believer in safe, effective vaccines, but let me just state a few facts about this vaccine. We know nothing about long-term side effects because not enough time has passed. We don't know how it will affect children because children have not been in the studies, in the trials so far. They're putting them in now, I think. The doctors seem to be over-promoting it to the point of not being honest. They're trying to tell you to get the vaccine after you've recovered from the illness. Again, there's no better way to mount a strong, robust, broad response, immunological response, than getting the illness. So to think that adding a vaccine is going to help you is just contrary to understanding of the human immune response. It just makes no sense at all. It's absurd. So consider that when you think about this and study it. I want you to study this stuff on your own. I'm just trying to help you along with the technical part. Here's the other thing that I mentioned the other night. I'm a little bit concerned about injecting a piece of messenger RNA into your arm that conceivably could get into your circulatory system and go to another organ that's more important than a few muscle cells in your arm, be it the brain or the kidney or the liver or the heart, and have that messenger RNA translated into a protein, the spike protein of the virus, which will be presented on the surface of that cell in the context of the class 1 major histocompatibility complex protein, recognized by the CD8 T killer cell, and destroy that cell. Destroying a few muscle cells in your deltoid is okay, but I certainly wouldn't want it destroying some of my heart cells or liver cells or brain cells. So thank you again for listening. Please visit my Patreon page so I can continue to produce these truth and science presentations. please become a patron. And thank you very much for listening. And I'll see you down the road. We will get to the bottom of all this, and hopefully we'll get a little bit more honesty out of the experts and the TV doctors. It's very important that you guys hear the correct information. So thank you again for listening, and I'll see you down the road.